So as we bring ourselves into Jesus' words today, and here's a question to get us thinking about this parable. When was the last time that you tended to something or somebody or some situation with the same tenacity that the gardener in this story tends to the fig tree? Or can you even think of anything? Surely you can think of something, but let that roll around in the back of your head and see if you can come up with anything. Some situation where you knew that there was a reason to keep going even when other people couldn't see it. When other people saw a tree that wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, wasn't giving you any figs, you saw a tree that was going to be really bountiful. So let's think about that. A woman I know, a story about this a while back, decided to tend to something with this kind of tenacity. And people thought that she was just a little bit crazy for doing that. Just like they might have thought it was kind of odd that this gardener, the gardener we usually think is Jesus, tended to that fig tree. But the other people couldn't see the importance of this situation, and she could. She knew it was important. So this is what happened. Her husband's grandmother, so her grandmother-in-law, always made cookies for him. At least once a week, she would bring cookies over for him. And he loved having her cookies, and her children loved having her cookies. They were this little comfort that kind of smoothed out the rough edges in their home. They were such a blessing to them. And they were one of those extra special family jokes because his mom had never learned how to make these cookies. She could make cookies just fine. She was an excellent baker, and they were great to take to the bake sale or to the neighbor's house, but they just really weren't quite the same. Well, Grandma got sick, and she passed away within about 3 days. She was fine, and then she wasn't, and had never taught the granddaughter-in-law to make these cookies. So this woman, the younger woman, decided that regardless of the fact that nobody had ever taught her, and the fact that she didn't bake in the first place, that she was going to learn how to make these cookies for her family. Not only had she never learned how to make the cookies everybody knew about, she didn't know how to make cookies at all, basically. But she had the recipe. Everybody knows how helpful grandma recipes are. They're kind of a list of ingredients, right? So she got the recipe, she got the ingredients, and she tried to make cookies. And it did not work. Not even the dog wanted those cookies, that first batch. So she got online and read some instructions, and she tried again, and she made cookies. That batch was edible. And her family politely ate them and said, well, they're not quite the same, but they're good. And she could tell, it wasn't good enough. These were not like grandma's cookies. And so she made a couple more batches. And then she decided she was going to talk to her mother-in-law, who, even though she couldn't quite get the cookies, she did have some tips for her because she'd obviously been around a few times when these cookies had been in the oven. So she tried it again, and she tried it again. They weren't quite there. And so she decided that she was going to start keeping a record. And so she kept track of every batch of cookies and the weather that day and which pan she used and got an oven thermometer to make sure she was exactly the same temperature each time. And she kept a journal of the cookies to see if it had something to do with anything else. Kept track of what brand of flour she used that time. Still couldn't quite get it. So then she was to the point that her family was like, okay, we love you, and it's great that you've tried to make the cookies, and we really don't need the cookies. It's okay. You have other things that you do just fine. And she was like, nope, we're going to do the cookies. But at that point, they were kind of sick of eating cookies. And so then she had to go make new friends to give the cookies to. Not kidding you, people that she had never really met before. She kind of became the cookie lady. She always had a bag of cookies. She was like, "You want some cookies?" Then she started going to have coffee with her grandmother-in-law's friends to see if they knew anything about the cookies that might help her, and invited them over to help her make the cookies. And about a year later, a little bit less than a year, with twice weekly batches of cookies, everyone agreed that she finally had it. Those were the cookies. They would pass. She attended to that cookie recipe with the same tenacity as that gardener, because she was attending to her family and to what it meant to them to keep that little symbol of love going in their household. She never did actually figure out what changed. Nothing in her journal ever clicked in that they worked on rainy days versus not rainy days, or with this brand of flour and not that. But whatever it was, she finally got it. And she made a lot of new friends and learned a lot of old stories in the process. And it was a blessing to everyone in so many more ways than she could have ever expected when she first pulled the flour out of her cupboard that first week after everybody had gone home from the funeral, and decided that maybe she should get new flour before she tried to start baking. It's one of those stories in the Bible, this one about the gardener, that is so opposite from so many biblical stories in that it applies to this time in human history so well that it doesn't seem like it was written so long ago. Except, of course, the fact that it was written about a fig tree. But other than that, it could have been written specifically for our time right now. Our culture has become so accustomed to moving quickly and expecting things to happen and moving on if things don't work, that this idea of tending to something that isn't working, even when other people tell us to move on, is very different from what people expect. And it takes a good deal of discernment to know when we see a blessing that just isn't quite there. That fig tree that just doesn't, next year it's going to be there. And when we're fooling ourselves into thinking that something as good is coming, when the fig tree really just needs cut down. That's probably why the gardener in Jesus' story sets a time frame. But it does lend the question to us. When was the last time that you tended to something with the tenacity of this gardener? Because you know that that's the way Jesus tends to you. Saying to the Father, yes, that's usually who the vineyard owner is compared to in this story, is the Father. So saying to the Father, but more readily to the world, our world of instant gratification, that you are worth waiting on. You're worth helping. You're worth tending to. You just need a little bit more support. You're going to get there. We're all going to get there. And if we don't, we're at least going to give it a good try. And we all look back at times in our lives, and we know that we've experienced this. We know those times when somebody said, no, we're going to keep doing this one more time. We're going to try it. We have that teacher, we have that friend, we have that parent, whoever it was that was in our life. And a lot of times it's with something much more profound than cookies. But sometimes cookies can be pretty profound. So this Lent, in our walk to the foot of the cross, where we give the world's brokenness to the resurrection, and we trust in that, we have this call to love the world in Jesus' name, to help them know God through how that shapes our identity as children of God. And that sometimes that means we tend to situations and to people and to things with such tenacity that they just almost don't have a choice but to change and to grow and to bear fruit. Because that's how much we love them. So this week, whether it's something as near as your own heart or as far away as something across the world that you've been called to pray for, or something that you haven't encountered yet that you're going to notice this week, this tenacious love is one of those amazing gifts that leads us on and blesses the world and blesses us and keeps us going to the cross, on that journey to the cross that sometimes seems long. Sometimes when we can see the cross, but it's harder to see the resurrection on the other side. That tenacious love says, nope, I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to keep going with you. So as we go out this week, may somebody see the blessings coming forth from each of you, and may you believe them enough to put them into action. Amen.